Well, good morning. This is Shannon, and I'm very excited to be going through the workbook and some of the slide deck and some of my notes for the CATM offered by BHAP, and that's the course on addiction treatment marketing. And I have completed course 4, 5, and 6. And those courses are Addiction Treatment Marketing Part 1, Part 2, and Course 6 is Ethical Compensation Practices, which I'm aware of is a kind of a hot button industry within the addiction treatment marketing. A hot button topic within the addiction treatment market industry. Thank you for bearing with me. And I am going to go through several things. I wanted to bring your attention to the folder I created on your drive, and I put 2 folders within that folder, and these are the marketing workshops for NCAAD conference, the 2018 conference. I took the workshop, and in this folder we have conference reference materials. So, for example, I took a few photos of some of the booths that I thought were lovely. Some of the details of the booths that, we can kind of look at and gather information on. There's Ashley, interesting, their booth. I thought their booth was interesting, and they're local to us as well. And I'll go over this in more detail, but the other folder is the workshop folder. And we were allowed to take photos, occasionally of the slide deck. And we haven't received the slide deck from Andrew Martin, who is the course instructor at BHAP. So I'll just be going through these as well as the notes I took as well, and the workbook. So you can see there was a workbook for each of these. And I took a few pictures for us to follow along. This is the workbook, and I also took pictures of my notes, which hopefully will be somewhat enlightening. And I'm going to go over just a short little period a day, and just talk about some of the things we learned and kind of coordinate all of these. So let's start with Addiction Treatment Marketing Part 1. And one of the things they spoke about was being an instigator, an innovator, an integrator, and an implementer. That these were kind of the 4 characteristics of an addiction treatment marketing. And they were concepts that they brought forward because one of the things in the workbook is, in what ways are you an instigator within your organization? This was a great course for me to take, by the way, because it was, for me, somewhat foundational, because my marketing experience was really limited to kind of assisting marketing of the marketing department within the university I worked in, mostly on the project management and the media creation side. So this is obviously a very specific field. And an example, one of the things they did is they gave us this workbook, but they didn't really give us a lot of time to work on this. I think they wanted us to really bring this back with us and give careful consideration to these questions. So you can see, as the workbook goes, I don't really fill it out so much because they didn't really give us time. But this first one, there were a few things. So what makes you an instigator within your industry? You may say, well, I think strategically, I'm pushing for growth. That's the way I feel I kind of have been an instigator. And it's a great little reference thing to go ahead and put your own feedback in and just kind of go through these questions yourself. In what ways are you an implementer within your industry? For example, I've always been transparent about my own recovery. And let's go, before we progress in this worksheet, let's look at my notes as well. and go through some of these. So Tenley, throughout my notes, I sometimes have ideas, and the ideas will have little stars by them. So one of the ideas is having questionnaires for our clients after they complete. And this is a great suggestion, I think. Hopefully something we can implement if we don't already have that in position, like feedback forms for our alumni as they complete. As long as they don't complete ACA or AMA, terms I now know against medical advice, against treatment advice. And also a mission statement. Now, I kind of brought this forward in the paper I wrote for Tenley, or the proposal I wrote for Tenley after this workshop. I suggested a mission statement. And one of the things you ask yourself as a marketer are what components of the mission does marketing need to provide? So some of the components of a mission statement are things perhaps only treatment clinicians can provide, but some of them, like what components are you providing as a marketer, is a question you want to ask yourself. And it'd be really nice to kind of develop a mission statement, and we can speak of these things less intangibly and more directly. One of the things, and I think this is actually something, and on the next page, I wanted to bring it forward. One of the things they said is if you don't have a brand, it will be created for you. One example of that is like Yelp reviews. If you have Yelp reviews and you're not addressing them, one of the things is you keep your eyes on Google reviews and Yelp reviews and any reviews that are showing up in any online publications, because you can often respond to them, and that's creating your branding rather than having it created for you. I wanted to jump to that because some of these things that I have on this first page, such as have specific answers by really knowing from the inside your program. And another thing I want to jump forward to is the marketing. The marketing. I can't find it, but the marketing director or the marketer for an addiction treatment center should be only second in knowledge to the clinical director. So really have specific answers, not generalities. That's something they stress many times, is having specific answers. So one thing I realized is, as a marketer, I have to know this program inside and out. I mean, I have to know how much it costs. All like specific questions. They talk about that you only have 6 seconds to get somebody's attention. That's kind of the new findings, is you have only 6 seconds to get somebody's attention. Something to really keep in mind. And here's a good example. So if you're saying you're good at co-occurring, like that, what exactly does that mean? What specifically does that mean? And another strategy that is considered powerful by at least by one of the facilitators in this is know what you don't specialize in. And that really gets people's attention. If you're having a conversation like, we don't really do rehab, we don't really do detox, and we haven't had a lot, or even something like we haven't had a lot of success in, not us, but in co-occurring, we haven't had a lot of success in like people who have exhibited violent symptoms, or we haven't had a lot of success in marijuana addiction. I think when you say things like that, it really brings a level of authenticity. They were just kind of bringing this forward. It brings a level of authenticity and it gets people's attention. And then when you say things like, oh, I'm really good at treating people who've been kicked out of other programs and who have not yet had an opportunity to have their habitual violent impulses looked at. I mean, now you're going into kind of specifics. Okay, so marketing is truth well told. I think that's McCann Erickson. I always think of Mad Men. McCann Erickson, I think that's actually a patented phase. Truth marketing is truth well told. Okay, one of the action steps here is to check on Yelp intently. So we did that. I went forward with that. Now, often one of the mistakes between clinicians and marketers is that you are told to, not have branding. They don't really, often clinics don't want branding. They just want quick conversions. And again, if you don't have a brand, it will be created for you. But you'd end up paying per patient acquisition, but not building the base over a life of a long time. And so here's a question: what is our brand? Now, that was a direct question for me to know if I was, to continue, or any marketer continuing with Tenley, just knowing what that brand is. And I did get a lot of information through the website. So I'm going to go into some of our slide deck right now. And this is in chronological order according to the workshop. So here, this is a great slide deck. I thought this was very interesting. What are the 5 C's? Circumstance, curiosity, characters, conversation, and conflict. Those are the 5 C's of telling your story. I took a picture of this because I think this is my strong suit. Telling stories are my strong suits. Using sensory engagement. Like, I went into Tenley, and the first thing I noticed was that I felt very comfortable with the sober living manager that was giving me a tour. I felt like I could tell him my secrets, and I just felt like a warm feeling when I started. Exactly, spark emotions. Stop bragging and start relating to your audience. They really stress listening. A lot of these things are foundational too, but it never hurts to kind of go through these. So circumstance, curiosity, characters, conversation, and conflict. Just to go back to that. That builds a story. You can talk about somebody's circumstance. You can say, well, then, you may be telling your personal story, where then I started to really get curious about if there was help for me anywhere. You bring in characters, conversations. I think an effective strategy would just be to tell a short anecdote and see how you can work in those 5 C's. Like, and then I had this conversation with our clinical director. She really told me something I hadn't thought of before. Conflict is a great idea. A conflict in a story about Tenley would be like, I had no intention of getting sober. I just wanted to learn to manage my drinking, and immediately they challenged me on this. We get the idea. Sensory engagement, and this is a nice little card. Tell them what matters, pick the top 3 points. This is things I think we do naturally, but it's a great exercise. So they talked about stakeholders as well, and I'm going to go to the workbook too after we just look at 3 of these slides, and we're going to catch up a little bit. Now, our stakeholders are an amazing source of referrals. This really bears kind of having conversations and bringing into our awareness. Our shareholders are our investors, our business partners, employers, employees, customers, local community, government authorities, others. I would say vendors. Vendors are our stakeholders. Anybody who has a stake in our success. I'm going to go into the workbook because there's some wonderful little things we can kind of look at on the workbook as well. Personal brand. Know what it is you do, know what it is you don't do, tell the truth well. We kind of went into this. Your stakeholders will remember you just like they'll remember your organization, and that's the marketer. All right, communication tactics, create influence, build dialogue, focus on sources of power, build relationships. 4 communications tactics with your stakeholders. Influence, build a dialogue, focus on sources of power. Now, I'm not sure I really remember what this means. It is on the slide deck, as you can see. Focus on sources of power. Build relationships is pretty self-explanatory, but this might be something to really kind of roll in our mind. Focus on sources of power. Maybe if I go into the workbook, there'll be a little more context of this. And after we kind of go through a few pages of the workbook, where I'm just going to kind of end this podcast and continue on. So when we talked about being an instigator, an innovator, an integrator, and an implementer, and you can look at these notes for references also and do this workshop. What criteria do you use to define your target customer or client? These are kind of basic marketing things, but I'm not going to go over this because I think it's a wonderful thing to do this workbook. How do you describe your products and services, offerings to your clients and customers? How do you describe the unique features of your products and services? Again, we speak in specifics. Specialize in confidentiality and discretion, I wrote. Incredibly effective in niche populations. I kind of perceived that about Tenley. So here's we're going back and we're kind of catching up in the brand. What does your brand represent? An intangible promise, a lifestyle, and a mission. An intangible promise is you will recover, for example. Lifestyle, successful money, family, health, etc. You know, when we choose images for our website, we're talking about lifestyle. Mission, to bring absolute personalization standards. How do you create influence with your stakeholders? We were talking about this. These are great workbook. I'm wondering if any of this is unclear as I'm speaking this. I think what they were talking about is, what does our brand represent? This is something we just want to know in these three categories. And the intangible promise is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something you add on to your mission statement, and you know, in association with the specifics. All right, now they talk a little bit. Here's a study sheet about discussing these issues. How do you build a dialogue with your stakeholders? Just a great thing to fill out. How can you communicate with stakeholders who have far more power than others? Interesting. How can you regularly communicate with stakeholders? So these are workbook questions for further study. What are some of the ways you can improve your referrals and relationships? And then there's an action plan template. So these are wonderful things to kind of think about and to go over and to come back to reference.